Excuse me, Your Worship, we are live.
Thank you, Chris. All right, Council, it's 2 p.m. and I'm going to call the SIC meeting to order. This is, as you know, we recessed last Monday on February 1st, so we're going to continue with the agenda where we left off there, but I will start off with the land acknowledgement. Today we acknowledge that Collingwood is located on the traditional territory of the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, including the traditional lands of the Anishinaabek, the Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwe peoples, and on lands connected with the Lake Simcoe and Ottawasaga Treaty of 1818. This is the home of a diverse range of Indigenous peoples whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors to our society. And we left off last week at item 7.3. So I will turn this over. It is C2021-02, Establishment in Terms of Reference, Affordable Housing Task Force. And I will pass this item over to CAO Skinner and Clerk Almas.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I'm going to quickly turn it over to Clerk Almas, who at the request of the notice of motion that was endorsed by Council, has put together a first draft of what the terms of reference could look like for a housing task force that would engage our community in advising Council on the best ways to move forward and embracing the depth of information that's available in our community members. So with that, I'll turn it over to Clerk Almas to please give us a high-level overview.
Certainly. Thank you, CAO Skinner. So I am just going to go through our slide deck here. So on our first slide, we have broken down. So if we can go to the next slide. So we have looked at the definitions of affordable housing, attainable housing, and social housing. So originally when this motion was presented, it asked Council and staff to investigate attainable housing. So if we look at the definitions, affordable housing is a very broad term that can be used, that includes housing provided by private, public, nonprofit sectors. It includes all forms of housing. The CMHC broadly defines affordable housing as shelter costs that equate to less than 30% of a household's pre-tax income, whereas attainable housing is market-based housing, affordable to households with a range of incomes at moderate end of the scale, so within the 30th to 60th percentile of income spectrum, and provided without cost or rent interventions from the public sector or other social housing providers. Social housing is purpose-built affordable housing that is affordable to households at the lowest end of the household spectrum of the regional market area, provided with ongoing government subsidy. So if we go to the next slide, this image was actually provided as part of the official plan working papers around housing. So it really shows that affordable housing includes attainable housing as well. If we don't focus on social housing from our, as a lower tier municipality, knowing that the social housing supports is at the county level, we can still look at affordable housing and what that can mean without social housing supports and include that attainable housing spectrum. Our next slide. So this is just a bit of background. Social housing, as I mentioned, is predominantly the County of Simcoe responsibility with occasional private sector contribution. The town does not have a direct mandate for the provision of social housing, including housing and homelessness. The county has invested in Collingwood affordable housing. So that was the one that was developed on the corner of High and 2nd Street, opening in 2019, which features 147 social and affordable units. The town's previous Attainable Housing Task Force was established in 2003. It was reformed in 2007 and it was dissolved in 2011. Our community-based strategic plan provides for the support and management of growth and prosperity, and that includes potential advantages such as attainable housing. And our most recent economic development action plan really identifies barriers to economic growth related to the lack of affordable housing. So again, the next slide here is directly out of that action plan. So to stimulate the creation of more attainable and attractive housing inventory to meet the workforce needs of Collingwood businesses. So they've identified in here, and they referenced to the Vision 2020 report that was published in 2000 that identifies this as a growing issue caused by by lack of affordable rental housing. And at the time, the average cost of a one-bedroom apartment in Collingwood was $578 per month. As a result, area businesses are concerned and have had some to curtail. Sorry, they had to curtail their operations because of lack of housing for their workforce. And so we can see in the next slide where we actually are sitting right now with rents. So housing in Collingwood, if we look at some of the demographics, older population than Ontario on average. So there's a smaller average household also in Collingwood to the Ontario average. Similar housing form spectrum to the province. The lower household income spectrum than the provincial average. And that indicates here that rent for a two-bedroom apartment is now approximately $1,400 to $1,800 per month. So when we looked at putting together a task force, what we've presented is it would be established for a 2-year term or earlier if their mandate has been completed. The Development and Operations Standing Committee may extend the term if required. The task force would be chaired by a council liaison to the Simcoe County Alliance to End Homelessness and include the chair of the Development and Operations Standing Committee or another member as designated by the committee. Staff, together with the 2 council-appointed representatives, will have the ability to populate the task force, requiring approval of standing committee based on the parameters for the public and private participation on that task force. All right, if we go to our next slide. So the proposed mandate would be investigate housing opportunities and partnerships for municipally owned lands. So right now we currently have two very critical pieces of land that the task force would be focusing on during their mandate. Also a focus on input to the official plan and zoning bylaw updates to increase and address affordable housing options. Identification of grants or other funding opportunities for affordable housing development, new renovation or conversions, and their communication to developers, homeowners, and to the town if supported from the town's grant writing resource would also be desirable. And to support and enhance Collingwood's progress regarding Council's commitment to the Economic Development Action Plan and supporting the UN Sustainability Goal number 11 pertaining to safe and affordable housing under the UN Habitat Collingwood. And our next slide. So again, the mandate would be focused on these opportunities noted and to research into the need for continued local affordable housing collaboration supported by the municipality, such as an advisory committee, local board, or corporation. We also note at this time, staff are not available to conduct detailed research opportunities or the advancement of initiatives and provisions of external information to the Housing Committee would rely on the members and the liaisons with the local housing support agencies and organizations. And our next slide focuses on the recommendation. So the council support the establishment of an affordable housing task force, which includes attainable housing on the housing spectrum, and further the council approve in principle the draft terms of reference as defined herein and refer to the newly established task force to provide further input and feedback for consideration by the DENO Standing Committee. All right, and that's our last slide. So one thing I'd like to say too is that we were able to turn this around in the short request that was provided, and we definitely welcome your input and feedback on any further refinements. The council seems willing.
Thank you, Sarah. Council, any questions or comments on that presentation? Deputy Mayor and then Councillor Doherty. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. If I may make a few comments, and then depending on maybe the flavor of the conversation, add further commentary if possible later. First, I just would like to thank staff for the turnaround on this report. And I don't mean this in a negative, although it will sound as such. I don't think that we as a council gave you necessarily the best maybe direction in terms of what we were looking for. And therefore, I think based on that, through what was proposed in the notice of motion or motion, I guess, that, you know, I can see that a lot of work and effort has gone into coming back with a report that we can sink our teeth into and hopefully move forward with something that we're all in agreement on. I don't have anything prepared in the sense of motions or notice of motions or amendments to this. I just wanted to put out a few comments and then get feedback from those around the table and see if we can come to some type of consensus as to how this could potentially move forward. A couple of things from maybe a macro perspective. One is that, and I am drawing on past experience, having been a part of the original Vision 2020 Housing Subcommittee that dates back to 2003. First time I ever stepped into the council chamber was in fact to present on behalf of that subcommittee. Mayor Terry Geddes was mayor of the time. In that report, it was report number 7, we identified a number of things. And I think that report, and I'd be happy to forward it just as a point of interest to my colleagues, they're relevant today, and they're things that still could be acted upon today from a macro perspective. But I think one of the biggest challenges that we have is that we need to very clearly establish goals and objectives that are clearly defined, that have objections that are attainable and can be measured, and have clear timeframes in terms of when we would either like feedback and or actionable items for us to follow up on. I think that in the context of some type of a task force or a committee, that I would like to see something that is maybe a little bit shorter in duration in terms of when that committee or task force would first report back to council, whether that be a 3-month period, a 6-month period. But be clear that, you know, if we're going to ask them to do something such as this, that we give clear direction so that they can really sink their teeth into something quickly and come back to us as to a committee, whether it be development operations or whether it be SIC, with meaningful recommendations. So with that said, I think that the report sort of looks at 2 opportunities. One is the attainable portion. And I think that as a council, really the area of opportunity there is for us to be able to look at what policies can we implement, what policies that relate to the official plan, what policies can we work with developers to ensure that we're maximizing densities, that we're changing some of the ways we look at, so that when a developer is prepared to maybe move forward with a project, they know that they can do so and perhaps come to us with a portion or some part of their development that is focused on attainable housing or something that we're looking for, as opposed to things that are purely market driven. We all know that the market works fine in this community, and we don't need to feed into the private market. So that said, I think that we need to really make sure that we speak to the policy and to the long-term vision in terms of what we can do to create attainable inventory. And it's inventory we're talking about. It's not housing, it's inventory. If we can somehow increase the inventory, ensure long-term supply of inventory at prices that people can afford, that's where we'll make a dent into the affordability within the community. The second is, and the clerk in her presentation reference, we do have a couple of projects that have been identified in the community, land-owned or in terms of partnership. And I think either through this committee or task force, or maybe a subcommittee or even separate, we should divide them out. There could be an opportunity where they're talking to one another. I think that that's important, but that that those two opportunities in particular, they're a little bit more urgent. They are ready to go in some respects. And I think that there's an opportunity if we could have a group that's actually dedicated to those opportunities, they could hit the boots, the ground running, and really come back to us with opportunities as to how we can better improve or utilize or take advantage is maybe the wrong word, but to really create new special opportunities within those two footprints. As it relates to the committee, I think that the more we are hands off, the better. I'd like to see the chair actually be independent of council. That does not mean that council shouldn't have representation, but I think that if we look at the if we look at the COVID task force, if we look at the mayor's task force, but particularly the COVID task force, I think that we saw an example where a chair who is a professional chair can really run good meetings, make sure that the vision is clear, make sure the objectives are tangible, and make sure that people are all sort of rowing in the same direction. And I think it was evident we saw positive outcomes in a very short period of time come out of that particular task force. And I mean, when I say that, I think it's important that we all recognize that those around the table, we're all busy, and not to suggest that others are not, but if we can find a chair who really has some understanding of this significant issue, but has the time and expertise, I think that would be a true benefit. So those would be sort of my opening comments, and I'd be interested in hearing from others as to what they think. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I see Sarah has her hand up. Clerk Almus, go ahead.
Certainly, sorry, Your Worship. I forgot to mention about opening it up to the public before we get into more.
Yes.
And we do have one individual that would like to speak, and our staff will just allow him. Perfect.
Good afternoon, Town Council. It's Matt Preddy here at home in town of Collingwood. Today I have the agenda in hand, and I just wanted to suggest that actually hearing Deputy Mayor's introduction there, that's a very smart way of, how do you say this, going to professional direction by spicing it up a bit with, getting professionals on side when it comes to, expansive task forces. And this is probably a good way to go in relation to moving forward in the new year. I would like to suggest that the zoning, as they showed with the hospital, the previous town council really slowed things down with the hospital, and they said, well, we don't know about this site, we don't know about that site, and we're saving this site for something, and that's fine. But I think, looking at the zoning, looking at it clearly and saying, let's reserve and promote sites that are fits the definition of like filling in what's empty and setting aside and promoting a grander vision of mixed use housing. I think that's all good. And I would like to suggest we still try and hold strong with social housing. I think we should actually try and maintain a social housing standard. Those numbers are interesting, the 1,400, 1,800. It's so true. Persons, and with this COVID, situation, the program, it's going to last for a very long time. We're going to see extreme a style of poverty that it's going to be generational. And I really think we need to look at clearly all options and maybe even almost like that cabin style village in Wasaga Beach of old. Guys, we got a lot of work to do and it's not looking good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. Sarah, do we have anyone else who would like to speak on this item?
Certainly, we have a couple more individuals. So if they wish to speak, please press the raise your hand feature. I think we're good to proceed.
Right. Thank you for that reminder. So after the Deputy Mayor, I had Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Worship. The Deputy Mayor, I think, has made some very insightful comments and suggestions relative to this staff report, and I'm in full agreement. The one weakness or potential weakness that I did see was the fact that there is no mention of consideration of a regional approach. And you know, we do not live in municipal silos, and certainly our labor force comes and goes across all of our 5 communities in South Georgian Bay. And so it seems to me that a stronger approach could be to begin with a regional committee and entertain input from all of our surrounding municipalities that have various availabilities of land, various availabilities of average housing pricing. I just see that this would be a more fulsome approach. Other than that, I'm very supportive of the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doherty. Other comments and questions, Council? Councillor Hamlin?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate all the comments that have been made, and I think I agree with all of them. It strikes me that perhaps the best thing to do is to take Clerk Almus's report and use it to set up the committee, and asked, as I believe she recommended, for the committee to report back to, I think she recommended Development and Operations Committee, but with specific items in mind, and as the Deputy Mayor said, with specific timeframes. And I'd be willing to, propose that the new committee report back within 6 weeks of its formation on, and I think these are the things I heard which were good. Firstly, their deadline for providing input to the official plan on attainable housing policies. 2, who the chair, they would recommend the chair be. And I think that who the chair will be come evident once we see who's on the committee. I know that, and we all know that there are some really strong people in this field in our community. I hope they'll appear on the committee, and I hope they'll stand forward to be chair. Thirdly, how they would see an input on the regional input, because as Councillor Doherty has said, for sure, we're sharing workforces and businesses and housing needs with our surrounding municipalities. And fourthly, how they would recommend we approach the 2 parcels of land that the town owns and with a timeline for moving forward before the end of this term. So that would be my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hamlin. Any other questions or comments, Council? Councillor Jeffrey?
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. So a couple of comments with respect to my other colleagues' comments, as well as the slides. I really appreciated seeing the continuum of housing again. The first time I saw this was in my Simcoe County training over in Aurelia, probably the last term of council. And it is important to understand that. And I know one of my colleagues on this council called me in the beginning with my notice of motion to ensure that I had worded it as attainable versus affordable. And I had worded it as attainable, and they thought that was best. But now I see the opportunities within the continuum to not be so rigid with that. So I do think that the direction we gave staff was particularly clear in that we wanted to find a way with the task force to enlighten her and engage in conversation about how we can impact the inventory within our community. I do believe that the situation is really beyond us even now, that we're going to have a lot of catch up to do, and I do agree with our public speaker today. I do like the Deputy Mayor's comments with respect to a chair with the Economic Recovery Task Force. It did work very well. It allowed for the council reps that were on that task force to break out into a number of subcommittees as well. But we were really the taskmaster. He had us very oriented on getting our job done. So the other thing I was wondering about, so not having to worry in terms of the terms of reference and makeup with a quorum of development and operations on it, because I guess when I first read the report, I was a little perplexed that there was no way on something I was so passionate about, and with my connection to some of the funding opportunities and solutions and things through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and things, there was no way for me to find my way onto this task force. So, but if it was a concern for the quorum of development and operations and reporting development and operations, I think the solution for that could be to have this task force report to Strategic Initiative Committee, because this is the committee that does work on the bigger files. And so I do agree also with the Deputy Mayor that there is a sense of urgency, and a shorter time frame for 6 months makes a lot of sense, particularly when we need to hopefully inform the budget process, if there's anything there, to inform the OP, which would take us some work at Strategic Initiatives Committee once recommendations of a task force came back. And so I think that's, in terms of the regional approach, I think the partners that have been proposed by staff wisely will bring that that perspective to the task force. And I think for now, I do agree that we need to listen to the committee as to what the solutions and other pieces we need to add to it going forward. So I think it's a bit of a mix. I'm not sure we want to be an outright regional. We're trying to solve Collingwood. And if the task force deems that that takes a regional approach, then I think that would be a wise thing to do. So those are my comments thus far.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McLeod.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So what I'm hearing so far is that we're fine with the terms of reference for the most part, but we want the chair not to be a member of council. We want a 6-month turnaround with a focus on policies, a regional approach, and that it would report to the SIC. Do these things need to be included in amendments to this motion and voted on separately? Do they need to be an additional motion? I'm curious to know. That is my first question, and then I have a comment.
Okay, and I think the answer is we would go through looking for amendments from the floor, and there would be amendments to direct staff to amend the report accordingly.
Super, thank you. And so my comment is that I agree with all of that stuff, and but I do want, if we're going to be strategic and responsible in a timely manner, we should probably get the M in there as well from the SMART, and put measurable in there as well. So we'd have to, I think there should be some way that we can measure this group's success. I'm not sure if we have an occupancy rate measurement, perhaps there's something like that, but I believe that measurable is kind of an important part to attach to this as well. And that would be my comment. And I'm happy to second any amendment that comes to the floor.
Thank you for that. And I guess We'll look to the amendments, but I would think that the measurables and benchmarking and indicators might be something that the task force itself could come up with, as it did with the economic recovery and support. But I absolutely agree with you. What gets measured gets done. So I'll look for any others who have not yet commented, and then I will look for amendments from the floor. Seeing no other comments, then we've got a number of suggestions, and I will open the floor then to amendments. Deputy Mayor.
I'm not trying to be smart or cute when I say this, but what was the amendment that Councillor McLeod was willing to second? Because I kind of liked what she had to say, but I'm not 100% I captured it all.
Well, from what I took was that the chair ought not be a member of council. And we have a 6-month turnaround with a report back to council, that the group focus on policies rather than on procedures, and that there is a regional approach considered, and that the task force reports to the SIC. Maybe I should just move the amendment instead of seconding it.
Yeah, you know, you can do that, but I think what I've got to do first is make sure that I get the main motion on the floor.
Yes.
So I better do that now. My apologies. So it's C2021-02 establishment in terms of reference affordable housing task force. The staff report C2021-2 establishment in terms of reference affordable housing task force be received, and the council support the establishing of an affordable housing task force, which includes attainable housing on the housing spectrum, and further that council approve in principle the draft terms of reference as defined herein, and refer to the newly established task force to provide further input and feedback for consideration by the Development and Operations Standing Committee. So I need to get a mover and seconder to get this motion on the floor. It's moved by Councillor Madigan, second by Councillor Hamlin. And then Councillor McLeod was midstream in proposing some amendments. And so why don't I pass it back to you, Councillor McLeod?
Thank you. So in the further that paragraph where it says input and feedback for consideration by the Development and Operations Standing Committee, I would propose that we amend that to read to the Strategic Initiatives Committee. That covers one of them. That we add a paragraph about, that we add a further that the chair of the task force not be a member of council, or do we need to get that granular? I guess it's my motion. I have to decide that, don't I? Let's put that in there too. That the group, the task force report to the Strategic Initiatives Committee within 6 months. And that the group keep a regional focus in its deliberations, and that it also focus on policy. I think that was all of them.
All right. And just for clarity, was the chair being external included in that?
I believe I said that, yes.
Okay.
The chair is to not be a member of council. I bet that Clerk Almus is furiously typing to capture all of this. Thank you.
All right, and can I get a seconder to get that on the floor, please? Councillor Doherty. And then I will open the floor. Councillor McLeod, would you like to speak to that now or go last?
Oh, I'll go last.
Okay, all right then. I will open the floor then for comments from council or questions. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone who has put a comment forward. So very supportive so far. I'd be remiss in just maybe backtracking on my one comment and just simply acknowledging that Councillor Jeffrey should be applauded for tabling the notice of motion and then bringing forward the motion to get us to this point. This is an important policy endeavor, and I think that we need to get moving on it. I do like the regional approach that Councillor Doherty has suggested. We know that the town of the Blue Mountains has moved forward with work in terms of potential build in Thornbury proper. And I think that in speaking with the municipality, with the group behind that particular development, as well as others, whether it be, say, their largest employer, Blue Mountain Resort, or the Village Association, I think that having them at least as part of the conversation, whether or not they actually have a seat at the table, is imperative. And I also think that it is important that Clearview Township and perhaps even Grey and Wasaga Beach are part of the conversation. There are so many layers to affordability beyond just housing. And so, for example, as part of the conversation with, say, a community such as Clearview Township, I think that the longer term conversation would be, what lands within Clearview Township should be opened up for development to allow to release some of the pressure that is happening within the Collingwood as a result of our defined boundary. And then maybe a more short-term part of the conversation, and I know that it's already taking place, would be, how do we increase or build upon perhaps urban transportation so that those who maybe can find affordable accommodation within the hamlets of Ottawa, Duntroon, and the town of Stayner see those as alternatives if they choose to live and work within, or to work within Collingwood, but can't live here from an affordability standpoint. But how can we support that type of growth from a regional standpoint? So I think that those are sort of underlying conversations that we need to be having at the same time. And then I think the very last comment that I'll make is just that we really need to be supportive and not establish any false expectations of this group and or within the community, because this is an absolutely steep hill to climb. And the market pressures that are at play are significant. And just to give you an idea, with the staff report, and I think I still have it in front of me, refers to a detached average price of $682,000. Year over year, the detached average price within the town of Collingwood was $877,000. Now, that's a significant increase year over year for that particular month, but it shows you that the train that's coming down the track as it relates to development and affordability isn't stopping, and we need to get on board and make sure that we're part of the conversation. So those are the things I would just like to state, and I think that this is a really good start, and I'm hoping that all of council will be supportive in moving this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Other questions or comments on the amendment? I have Councillor Hamlin, and then I know I've got you batting cleanup, Councillor McLeod. Go ahead, Councillor Hamlin.
I have a question through you, Mr. Mayor, to Clerk Almas. To my mind, the two parcels of land that the committee is going to have to make recommendations on and council is going to have to make determinations on are in of themselves huge projects, and in your view, is this something this committee will be able to come back with concrete solutions on?
Clerk Almas?
Certainly, through your worship. Originally, when we looked at the term, we realized that some of the policy discussions could be accomplished much sooner. However, the length was added regarding, especially one of those properties that, if this task force was going to champion, a potential redevelopment, it will take time. I believe, though, regardless, if the committee or the task force is asked to report back in 6 months, that would be something that they would definitely be reporting on the status of where they're at with that. But if the group gets together, they're very focused and aggressive. I think we could definitely have some positive results in 6 months.
Any follow-up, Councillor McLeod?
Thank you. No, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else before I pass it over to Councillor MacLeod? Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. Just a point of clarification, Mr. Mayor. The revised motion is suggesting that this committee would not report back to council for 6 months?
I'll look for clarification. It would report back to SIC. I don't know if it would be have its final report, I think was the terminology, within 6 months, and it could certainly report back in the interim, I would think. I'll look to Councillor MacLeod, whose amendment it was.
Yes, my intention was that this task force last no longer than 6 months. So I believe there could be interim reports. I didn't want to get too far into the weeds directing the group, but to have some focused work done 6 months from now, completed.
Any follow-up, Councillor Doherty?
Yes, because certainly speaking for myself as one member of SIC, I think that it's important for this project also to be on this committee's radar, and thus more frequent reporting back in terms of progress would be something I personally would like to see.
Okay, thank you. Other comments or questions, Council? Well, I will certainly be supporting this initiative, and as this is an important piece that we've seen identified in our community-based strategic plan and in our economic development action plan, and it's been a problem that's been plaguing our community and is only getting worse with the economic stresses that and growth pressures we see ourselves under. So I think this is a critical piece that needs to be addressed, and I think that we've got the beginnings here of an excellent resource for council, and I look forward to following their progress and getting their final recommendations. So with that said, then I will pass it over to Councillor MacLeod for final comments, and then I will call the vote.
Thank you. So I have made what I think are 5 concrete amendments to this, and I think I may actually have to do a amendment to my amendment insofar as I would like to see our representative from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities included on its membership. And I'll look to Clerk Almus for direction. Do I need a seconder to do that? Since I've already had the amendments introduced through you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I think it's you could do it either by separate motion or amending your amendment. One way or the other, you can certainly get it on the floor. I guess what's most convenient. If you want to amend your amendment, then you'd need the approval of your seconder to put that on, and so it's your election how you want to proceed.
Okay, then I would like to add that, and I believe my seconder was, I have no idea who my seconder was, I apologize.
Councillor Doherty.
Councillor Doherty.
Councillor Doherty, are you happy with that amendment to our motion?
Yes, I am. Thank you. Sleep at the switch there.
Thank you so much. So that's so there we are. That would be my last word on that.
Good, thank you. And I'll go around because of that amendment just one last time if there are any other questions or comments on the further amendment. And if not, then I will call the vote then. All in favor of the amendment to the main motion? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. So now we'll go back to the main motion as amended. And I don't know if there are any questions or comments before I call the vote on that. It's been an excellent discussion. Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
I apologize. I meant to ask this earlier, and maybe it's already been addressed. Could you, through you to the clerk, maybe the CAO, or just my colleagues in terms of their sense, what is the sense if we're giving a 6-month mandate in terms of the expectation? Are we looking at a committee that's meeting once a week, bi-weekly? I don't think that once a month is sufficient. And the second is if we could just get a little bit more commentary on the resources at this point. it appears that the resources are still 5% of staff time and no additional funding. So there's no additional monies available should this committee need anything. I'd just like to clarify that.
Thank you. I'll look to CAO Skinner or Clerk Almus to answer that question.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think I could start at least with pieces of this. And as far as the 6-month mandate, I think you used, I think it was you, one of the council members used a great example of our COVID recovery task force, which really did take it upon itself to set up subcommittees and have meetings at the frequency that were needed. So it would be my hope that the members would, set up meetings that match their needs. And I would agree with you. I don't think a meeting once a month will achieve the goals of the task force. And hopefully through some of those interim report backs, you'll be able to get a feel for that as a committee and as a council prior to the full 6 months duration running out. Right now, what we have set up is basically administration of the committee through the staff. Because this is a portfolio that we don't usually have, we have no trouble with the resources that we received. Thank you very much in the budget for this 2021 year with making sure that committee is provided with staff supports to help with their meeting setup and the routine type things. What we don't have set up right now and would have to go through a prioritization discussion with council if it was needed was if you wanted a substantial amount of research delivered, for example, then we would have to talk about the resources to support that type of activity. But what we were hoping through this committee is that we would be very well prepared as staff and as council members to head into the 2021 budget with that type of information in hand about what you need from us as staff. And otherwise, we would just have to have that interim conversation with you as the resources were needed by the task force. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor, I see you nodding. Any follow-up? No? Okay. All right. Well, then I'm going to call the vote on the main motion as amended by the amendments. And all in favor? And that is passed unanimously. Thank you very much to staff and council for the discussion there. And look forward to striking this task force and seeing them get down to work. Item 7.4, C2021-03 Committee and Board Governance Review. And I will pass this over to staff. I think Clerk Almus could take us through this.
Certainly, Your Worship. So we'll put up the presentation. So again, this committee and board governance review was requested by council through a number of challenges that we experienced last year, some insight from the public, and we felt it was timely to undertake a review. If we go to the next slide, we can see the background of when the last review was undertaken. So it was completed in 2014. And so the following actions have been implemented since then. So we have the standing committee approach, the updated community-based strategic plan, dissolution of the Trails Committee and reestablished as the Trails and Active Transportation Committee, establishment of the Mayor's Economic Development Task Force, the Social Service Roundtable, the Unity Collective, as well as now we have a strong video conferencing meeting process as a result of COVID that incorporates public engagement and participation. So these are, some substantial areas that, impact how we govern our committees and boards. So if we go to the next slides, this one here identifies the framework that we have right now here in Collingwood. So we have our standing committees. They're all populated by members of council. And from that, we have our committees and boards where many of them report into the standing committee. And those all have public representation There's a limited few that do have council representation on those committees and boards. Town task force, we have other subcommittees and task force that are components of various boards and committees, or we have external organization representation. So if we look at the next slide, we can see the breakdown of what we do have right now. I know this slide does appear quite small. It's also within the staff report for any of the public that is viewing. So we have our accessibility committee that reports through corporate community services, the heritage committee through the development and operations, the museum reports through corporate community services, the trails and active transportation committee reports through corporate community services, the committee of adjustment and property standards does report directly to council. They are a quasi-judicial body and are independent. The downtown BIA Board of Management reports through corporate community services. The library board, again, is independent, reports directly to council, same as the police services board. The mayor's economic development task force reported through the DNO. We have our Unity Collective, the social service roundtable, and now our affordable housing task force. So that's will be updated now to reflect the SIC. So you can see that we try to ensure that a number of our committees do have a staggered term that helps with transition throughout a regular council term. Some of these that are concurrent with council, again, those are a requirement through legislation. If we go to our next slide, these are our external organizations that have town representation. So the one that you'll notice that was added that wasn't in the original staff report was the new Tecumseh Improvement Society. So currently that right now is represented by our Director of Public Works Engineering Environmental Services. The other areas are all represented by 1 or 2 members of council, with the exception of the EPCOR Town Advisory Committee also having the CAO participate on that one as well. If we go to the next slide, so again, the framework for good governance, we have our procedural bylaw. So with whatever changes we decide moving forward with, we will have to update the procedural bylaw. The recommended governance updates, establishing subcommittee quorums, conflict of interest, not applicable to the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. So again, we've touched on this. We've heard some members of council regarding advice from our integrity commissioner speak to qualifying and non-disqualifying interests and disqualifying interests. So we want to incorporate that into the recommendation as well for changes to the procedural bylaw. The concerns around the subcommittees is we want to ensure that since a subcommittee isn't governed by the formal quorum requirements, we want to ensure that if there happens to be a few members on a subcommittee, that they may have a quorum of their committee. The one in particular that I'm thinking about is our Museum Advisory Committee. They'd like to set up, they're a small but mighty group, they want to set up a membership subcommittee. So if 3 members sit on that committee, then they constitute as quorum. So if we make changes to the procedural bylaw, we can allow them to meet as a subcommittee as long as they're not making any decisions that are required to be decisions of the advisory committee, and recommendations would always go back to the advisory committee for a full decision. The next one, named outside organized agencies on municipal bodies. So there is opportunities and there's challenges with having external representation on our advisory bodies. Opportunities include they provide an expert opinion and external insights, access to outside or additional information that may not be readily known or available to staff or members. And generally, many of them can speak from experiences. The challenges that we face, it can place members in a real, apparent, perceived, or potential conflict. Interest could be considered or perceived as lobbying. Does or should the organization's representative truly speak on behalf of that organization? And does meeting time enable this? So an example of that is specifically with the BIA representation to the Heritage Committee. Those items are not vetted by the board before they are discussed at the Heritage Committee. So does that individual have a direct mandate our position on behalf of the board to be speaking at the committee. If we go to the next bullet there, could include more than one local agency, making it difficult in deciding which agencies to include or exclude. We could eliminate candidates that may be more qualified that aren't part of an organization. Member may not necessarily have the expertise in the mandate of the advisory committee or board. And if the organization submits a name for council to choose based on qualifications and is appointed, and the member leaves the organizations, it can be problematic. So if we go to our next slide. So one of our recommendations is that we implement a pilot project. So the Museum Advisory Committee, the Heritage and Accessibility Committee undertake a one-year pilot project to engage and consult with local organizations that have experience, expertise, or focus on the mandate of the specific committee, whereby agencies and organizations would be appointed as non-voting members through a vetting process similar to the committee board recruitment process, and appointments would be limited to 2 organizations per committee during this pilot project. If we go to the next slide, the committee board, or task force size. Obviously, we'd like to keep membership of all of our advisory bodies at an odd number to avoid ties, recruitment and ensuring qualified applicants, mandate and workload, meeting efficiency and effectiveness, ensuring the public/applicants have appropriate time to commit to the committee and board, and obtaining and maintaining a quorum. So if you look at our next slide with regards to the recommendation, staff are recommending the duties of members also be revised to include the following bullets. Where possible, a member should discuss a potential recommendation with staff prior to the meeting to assess resources that are available to implement the recommendation. Prior to voting on matters, ensure that all relevant information has been made available, and if not, to refer to standing committee and council if a detailed staff report is necessary, or directly to staff if it does not require significant time away from their approved work plans to obtain the information prior to making a decision. To carry out the duties of members under the Municipal Act 2001 and to act in accordance with their declarations to the oath of office, oath of allegiance, code of conduct, lobbyist registry, and procurement policies. So again, those weren't specifically stated in members' requirements before. We want to make sure that it's there. Staff definitely see a benefit of if substantial items come immediately to an advisory committee or board that staff haven't had an opportunity to assess, that it is very valuable to get all the information before making a formal recommendation to the standing committee or to council directly, depending on who they report to. And if we go to the next slide. So the general roles of committee, board, task force members, staff recommend amending the duties of members to also include to disclose any real or perceived conflicts of interest that may not be pecuniary in nature, to increase transparency and further not participate in the discussion if the member discloses the reasons they believe it is a disqualifying interest, and to represent their own personal interests and opinions and not that of an agency or organization unless the member has expressed authority or knowledge of that specific matter. The next item is a specific change with regards to the Accessibility Advisory Committee. The current membership is 7 voting members, all of which are citizens appointed by council. A majority of the members are required to be persons with disabilities as required by legislation. And the recommendation is enable non-voting member privileges to approved agencies as part of that pilot project. Our next recommendation, again, is with respect to the Heritage Advisory Committee. So the current membership is 4 voting members, all of which are citizens appointed by council with 1 voting Collingwood BIA representative. And we are recommending, again, to enable the pilot project of having approved organizations be non-voting members, and that the Heritage Committee maintain a composition of 5 members consistent with the size of our Committee of Adjustment. And further with this would include that the membership would be comprised of 5 voting members from the public. and that the BIA could be considered as one of the non-voting member privilege opportunities. Our next one is specific to the museum advisory, again, the one-year pilot. The next one is the Trails and Active Transportation Committee. They currently have 7 voting members, all of which are citizen members appointed by council. Recommendation that the terms of reference be approved as provided actually by the Trails and Active Transportation Committee. So this is an outstanding matter. The new committee was tasked with developing a terms of reference. In last summer, they've developed a terms of reference and it's never come back to committee for approval. So within this, we're requesting that terms of reference be approved. Next slide, we're also recommending that the minutes be reported to council for our Committee of Adjustment and Property Standards Committee. Currently, those minutes are not submitted or posted. Actually, they are posted within iCompass, but they're not presented publicly within our council agendas, and we think that would be a very important opportunity. Again, it will enhance public transparency regarding those committee of adjustment processes and their decisions that they're making at that level. So the downtown BIA Board of Management, 9 members in total, 8 members have to be members of the BIA, where there's 1 council representative, or that could be a member of the public that's appointed by council. So the recommendation regarding the BIA is that we conduct a review prior to the 2022 municipal election regarding the structure of the BIA Board of Management in consultation with the board itself, because any changes to the structure and their governance model has to be approved before the new members to the board are appointed after the 2022 municipal election. The Police Services Board, currently the staff resources are the CAO with 2 council representatives. The recommendation is that the Secretary of the Police Services Board be the Director of Planning, Building and Economic Development Services or designate. The transition period for that is anticipated January 2022. And originally, when we were looking at the process of moving forward our recommendations, there are some significant changes to some of the subcommittees as identified or advisory bodies. So we recommend that we do a public engagement consultation with regards to what's being proposed. Staff will finalize and engage Collingwood Page campaign to solicit input and feedback from the public and the stakeholders, and all feedback will be compiled and presented to the Strategic Initiatives Standing Committee at the end of March for final review and consideration. And that's the recommendations that we're proposing at this time.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for that thorough report. Before I go to council, I will see if there is anyone in the gallery who would like to speak.
We have 1 individual requesting to speak, and it's Mr. Matthew Pretty, so we will allow him to address the committee.
Hey, Town Council. That was an excellent presentation from a legal standpoint. Guys, I have something to suggest here, and actually this is perfect timing for this. It's actually quite funny. And it's not funny because the acknowledgement we're reading now that was once a European cultural point of interest with the legal sense of biblical times, and now it's been changed to contemporary legal standing regarding land. This acknowledgement really bothers me. It has no acknowledgement of current persons who are non-Indigenous, and the word I came up with during Sarah's presentation, our clerk, is that we should add, in my opinion, this is the home of a diverse range of Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors of our Canadian society. That might be a bit much, but I'd like to ask the clerk specifically here, especially in relation to her presentation. Relations is an important word as well, all our relations. Could we add that to this acknowledgement? I feel it lacks something. It really lacks the sense of modern population. We know, according to Collingwood, there's hardly any Indigenous people present. There's maybe all of 7, 10, or 15 persons. This is obscene. I would like to ask if we could add non-Indigenous peoples to this acknowledgement. It really burns me. Thank you.
Matthew, and I know that Director Culver's here, and he was involved with the drafting of the acknowledgement. So perhaps, Dean, I'll let you comment.
Thank you, Worship. Traditional land acknowledgements is a direct outcome of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and one of the advices that was provided by that commission. And it's intended to specifically and singularly recognize Indigenous peoples as citizens of the origins of our country, the country that we get to enjoy. So it specifically identifies Indigenous people in the absence of others for that reason. There have been discussions, and I know that through Black History Month, for example, we're recognizing individuals of Black heritage who have contributed to the history of the community as well. And there's definitely going to be lots more opportunities as the Unity Collective gets its feet under it to recognize all of the diverse offerings that the community has benefited from its diverse path. But when it comes to the Indigenous land recognition, it's really specific to the Indigenous presence before colonialism. And so I would not recommend changing it at this time.
Thank you, Dean. All right, Council, I will read the recommendation, and we'll get it on the floor, and then we can have questions and comments. So the recommendation is staff report C2021-03 Committee and Board Governance Review be received, and that Council endorse in principle the amendments to the committee and board governance structure, establishing bylaws and terms of reference as recommended herein, and direct staff to proceed with public consultation. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Councillor Madigan and Councillor Berman. And Councillor Jeffrey, you've got your card up. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. If we could sever to exclude the recommendations specific to the Active Transportation and Trails Committee. I have a conflict as an immediate family member as a member of that committee, so I'd just like to sever out that specific recommendation. And I've just filed my paperwork.
Yes, thank you for that, and we will do that. So dealing then with all but the Active Trails and Active Transportation Committee, please. We'll deal with those first, and then we'll deal with the latter separately. Go ahead, Councillor McLeod. And Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. I have a question and a proposed amendment. My first question is on slide number, I'm going to say 5. Clerk almost made reference to the new Tecumseh Improvement Society, and I wonder, I'm looking at my own slides that were sent. I believe you mentioned this briefly, that wasn't included. Could I get you to expound on that a little bit through you, Mr. Mayor?
Sure, that's part of the new Tecumseh Water Pipeline Agreement, and that's a society that was set up, I think, to manage the pipeline, but I'll turn it over to Clerk Almas for more background on that.
Thank you, Worship, and I will actually have either Director Slama or CAO Skinner kind of refer to the mandates of that group.
Sure, who wants to take that? Go ahead, Sonia.
Thank you, Clerk Almas, and Your Worship. I think I see Director Slama's name, but anyway, that is it is a new Tecumseh Improvement Society. It does manage the pipeline that goes from the boundary of Collingwood to distribute water under our now expired, but agreement with new Tecumseh that will come back to council in the next couple of months. And the Improvement Society, I believe that the setup of the organization is a company. It's not a service board, and Aqua, New Tecumseh, an independent member, and Collingwood sit on that group, and it deals with things like the repair, maintenance, and financing, et cetera, of the pipeline itself. So there's a few things related to the pipeline that will come back to council for decision in the imminent next month or so, as those agreements are negotiated, and hopefully we get some direction to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, CAO. Any follow-up, Councillor McLeod?
Yes, thank you. Has this society had a member of our staff on it since its inception, or is this new? Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Pass that over to CEO Skinner. Go ahead.
I thank you, Your Worship, through you to Councillor McLeod. I don't know about since its inception, but I do know that the head of the PUC had sat on that NTIS group previously, and then it had transferred to our Director of Public Works since she's been in the position. But I know staff have been on that group for 10 plus years. Yeah.
Thank you. It somehow has escaped my notice until today. Thank you. That answers my question. And now I want to talk a little bit about a proposed amendment to our to the motion before us. I would like to request. I'm just looking for the actual motion. I'm sorry. That we just severed. That we endorse in principle the amendments are the amendments to the committee and board governance structure. And I would like to request within that motion a staff report on the committee of adjustment. And my reason behind that is that having just looked at the report that they put forward, that the board put forward in this report, they conducted 12 minor variance applications, incidental applications, 3 minor variance applications, and 10 consent applications. And I'm just concerned from a fiscal responsibility point of view, what is being spent on this committee that has done 22 things in the last year, and whether those resources might better be deployed by our strategic initiatives committee. I don't know the answer to that question, but I would like to find out through a staff report. And I think that those staff reports should include costs incurred by the committee each year since, say, 2007, not limited to per diem and mileage and any other costs for operating the committee, as well as costs incurred by LPAT hearings and OMB hearings, I guess, since that's what it was called previously. And the report should probably detail the implications of council absorbing that role within the Strategic Initiatives Committee with best practices from other municipalities incorporated. And I guess I'm going to need a seconder to that amendment.
You will, and Councillor Jeffrey has seconded it. I don't know if Sarah, you have any comments on that, or Director Farr would have any comments on that motion that might give assistance for council.
I'll let Director Farr tackle that one.
Thank you.
For you, Mr. Mayor, Councilor McLeod. So a committee of adjustment is an entity that's a creation of the Planning Act. Council appoints members to the committee to deal with kind of more routine, regular matters, I guess less complex than full zoning bylaw amendments, official plan amendments, and that sort of thing. The committee itself is required to operate on a pretty strict legislative time frame. So from a date of filing a committee of adjustment application to the date that it is heard, it has to fall within 30 days. There's various public notification requirements set out in the Planning Act. If you fail to meet that timeline, then the applicant's in an appeal position to have that matter referred to the LPAT, or the provincial appeal body, to have the matter dealt with. So it does have a sort of a strict a time frame mandated in the Planning Act that has to be met. So that committee has had years where it's had quite a few variances and consent applications. They tend to run in cycles relative to the economy. I would anticipate increased activity at Committee of Adjustment, just simply given the level of interest in existing real estate in Collingwood, the cost of properties, and the desire of people to have more space to live in. So that typically necessitates minor variances, and also in this development context, you see more people trying to cut lots out of extra wide lots. But primarily the administrative challenge with running the committee through a committee of council is timing. So there are a lot of municipalities that do have that kind of volume of activity at the committee, but because it's such a rigorous, rigorously run schedule relative to the Planning Act, it requires those consistent resources. There's an additional matter as well, and that would be that a council may not want to be involved in minor planning applications. So for example, having a direct control of the matters that come before the Committee of Adjustment would have council directly dealing with questions of, say, someone wants a shed and it's 3/4 of a meter from a side yard, then a property line, then 1 meter, and like minor changes in height. There's the occasional controversial Committee of Adjustment file, and I think those are managed well by the committee, just from my observations. And there are times when council might see that having that arm's length relationship with an appointed committee provides, I guess, more balanced kind of administration of Planning Act approvals, insofar as you're not pulled right into the nitty-gritty details of day-to-day neighborhood kind of planning issues. And so so that's something that would certainly have to be considered. So those are some comments that might be worthwhile considering in terms of how you advance with this.
Thank you, Director Farr. Councillor McLeod.
Thank you. Thank you for that insight, and I think I would still like to go ahead with this request, and I was definitely aware of all of those comments made by Director Farr. My response to one of them, or to certainly the final report, or the final comments that he made, was that we as councillors are held responsible for the decisions that are made, regardless of whether we make them at this point. And I think we're going to, I know that members of this council will remember that we had some angry neighbors coming to us about some developments, and I found it rather difficult to have to take responsibility for a decision that I did not make. And if I'm going to get in trouble from a member of the public for a decision that is made, I want to have made it. All that being said, I am not looking for a decision. I'm looking for a staff report upon which we can make a decision. And I appreciate Director Farr's comments, and I expect them to be included in that report. Thank you.
Thank you. So the motion is on the floor for an amendment. Questions or comments, Council? Got Councillor Doherty and then Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Your Worship. Are you seeking comments on the entire report or just on the amendment?
I'm just seeking a commentary on the amendment, which is to get a staff report about the Committee of Adjustments.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question, or maybe two, and a comment as well. So through you to Director Farr, the committee, when making its decision, does it have any reports before it from staff when they have these applications before it?
Director Farr.
Yes. So just to provide a quick summary, the application comes in, it qualifies as being received for review by the committee. It is circulated to staff and agencies, and a report is prepared issuing a staff recommendation to the committee. And then the committee hears from the applicant, hears from the interested public within the notice area, and takes into consideration all the information and issues a position. The decision is subject to a 20-day appeal period. And if that 20-day appeal period lapses, it is a final decision. Otherwise, the matter may be appealed by either people who are supportive of or against the proposal.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just going to speak against the amendment. I thought, in my experience, it's very small municipalities that have council act as the Committee of Adjustment and Land Division Committee. And once you have any number of applications, it can really clog up an agenda of council or a committee. And it seems to me we've had, in the short time I've been on council, very full agendas and weighty matters that we've had to deal with. Also, in my experience, the appeals, and I know there's a concern about the costs of LPAT and OMB hearings, but in my experience, really, I would say whether it's the committee issuing the decision or council, you often are going to end up with the same appeals and the same costs, regardless who's issuing the decision. I think that, it's an efficient way to handle these kind of smaller applications. And I don't feel I need a staff report to think about this any further. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hamlin. Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I support the request, if anything else, for us just to review it and to see again. I mean, Councillor Hamlin's maybe brought up one reason why we might not want to consider it, but I think it's been a while since it's been reviewed. I know this was talked about in my term when Chris Carrier was mayor. And I don't think it hurts to revisit anything, because similar to Councillor McLeod, when things come that decisions that maybe are not in line with staff's recommendations, which may suggest they're not in line with council's vision, and again, we're taking responsibility for someone else's decision in that vein, that it might not be bad just to take a look to see that we're doing we're providing the residents, which is the biggest priority, with the best possible service. So that's why I'll be supporting the amendment.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments, Council? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Through you to the CAO. I'll just preface it by saying I'm inclined to support this request, but I would just like to know from the CAO, if passed, what is an appropriate expectation in terms of time to deliver the report, given that I respectfully would suggest that it's maybe not top priority.
CAO Skinner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Deputy Mayor Hull. Thank you for that question. We're just in the throes of completing some operational planning so that we can schedule out the rest of this year with all the items that Council endorsed in the budget this year. I don't think that it will be coming forward in the next couple of months, but I would need to talk with Director Farr just to see what it would take, if it's very straightforward or not, to come up with that information. But we would have a better answer for that in March. I did want to make a quick comment on the being accountable for decisions that you don't make concept. Because I think that one of the things that council does, and I believe in Collingwood council does well, is you set out the resources and the intentions to hire the folks that have the ability to do the work well. And this is a little bit different because it's one step further removed, because it's a committee, the Committee of Adjustment, and not just the staff. But every day I and possibly even more so you live with the decisions that are made on, say, building code matters by the CBO and under the regulatory authority that is given to him or her. We live with professional decisions made by the fire department. So I think that the concept that you live with decisions made by others is not foreign, but I do still understand the request. And I think, expectation in time, no later than this summer, unless directed otherwise, and we could confirm timing of a report should one be required within the next month or so.
Thank you, CAO. Any follow-up, Deputy Mayor? Any other questions or comments? I know Councillor Doherty had her card up, but she has spoken once, so I'm just going to make sure that no one else who has not yet spoken. Seeing none, go ahead, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. My question's been answered.
Okay, thank you. All right, well then we'll call the vote on the amendment, which is for a staff report on the Committee of Adjustments. All in favor? Opposed? Duly noted. Okay, thank you. Now we go back to the main motion with the exception of the trails and active transportation provisions, which we will sever off. Are there any other questions or comments on the other items? Go ahead, Councillor Doherty, and then Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you. I do have a number of comments in regard to the Trails and Active Transportation Committee, but I'll save those until Councillor Jeffrey recuses herself. So in the meantime, I have a question in regard to a suggestion in regard to the BIA and BIA membership. First of all, through you to Clerk Almas, when you described the form of the BIA board, at one point you said that the Heritage Committee board, that the BIA would be a voting member, and then you had said later that they would not be. So I was just looking for confirmation on that.
Sure.
Certainly, for clarification, my apologies if that was not clear. So currently, the BIA does have a voting member on that committee, and the recommendation would be that we would gain one more public representative, and the BIA would sit as a non-voting member. Potentially, and again, that process would be vetted by council.
Okay, thank you. I would agree with that. The next point that was mentioned in regard to the BIA was the notion that currently the BIA reports to Corporate and Community Services, and the recommendation was that they would continue to do so. However, in my view, the BIA carries with it such a strong economic development role. It's way more than just beautification of the downtown now. And so it seems to me that consideration could be, maybe even should be made to have it report to development and operations. So I will make that observation, and if there's any comment from staff, I'd be happy to hear it.
Sarah?
Certainly, I can speak briefly to this one. That was actually strong consideration at the time, and we had tried to establish the committees to be somewhat equal, and we found that obviously the DNO committees have some pretty significant reports when they're going through. However, there was such a good tie with the Parks Department and the beautification and the events and the marketing aspect of it that tend to fall more under Corporate and Community Services. But it's, again, at the committee's pleasure.
Councillor Doherty?
No, thank you. My sentiment would be that they would report to DNO, but that I guess we'll decide that as a council as a whole. So those are my comments in regard to all committees except Trails and Active Transportation.
Okay, Deputy Mayor, you had your hand up with that to address specifically the BIA issues.
It was to speak to the issue of the heritage member, the BIA member sitting on the Heritage Committee as a non-voting member.
Okay, I didn't know if it flowed from Councillor Doherty's questions, and so I've got you down. I'll come back to you. I'm going to go to Councillor Hamlin first. I just didn't know if you were speaking in direct response to Councillor Doherty's questions. So go ahead, Councillor Hamlin, and then I'll come back to you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I have a few questions for you, Mr. Mayor, to Clerk Holmes. Is it, for some of these committees and boards and task force, council receives reports on a fairly regular basis. With respect to others, we hear nothing ever. And I'm just wondering, as part of the review, is it possible we could ask for at least an annual report from each committee, board, task force, including the ones that are considered external?
Certainly, Your Worship. I think that's definitely something we could do. We could, potentially incorporate it with the other annual report that we're doing, or sporadically, throughout the year. But I think that's a great suggestion.
Does that need to be a specific amendment to what's before you, or what's before council, I should say, today?
It would be an amendment. So sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. I think it would be an amendment if you want it covered off. Councillor Hamlin, then
Okay.
Let's put it on the floor.
Okay, so I'll come back to that one. And my second question through you, Mr. Mayor, is how will we decide who are members on task forces? And will your report contemplate this? Or, because I know for some of these committees and boards, we advertise and we get people coming forward and they're selected by council ultimately. The Mayor's Economic Development Task Force was sort of put together in a hurry and there wasn't a formal process for it. What about the Affordable Housing Task Force and any other task force that council might set up?
I think task forces would be situational dependent, given timelines, but I'll look to the clerk to answer.
Certainly, Your Worship, and I would agree with your summation there that it could be task force specific. Obviously, this task force that are set up similar to like a subcommittee, they don't require a formal process, but for the most part, we want to be as open and transparent about the processes. So we do have our recruitment policy. So items like the affordable housing, we would have a recruitment most likely for that, again with potentially specific reaching out to specific organizations that we're trying to target. So it could be a mix.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, because I'm really just speaking on the part of public transparency, and members of the public may be thinking they had all the answers, should have an opportunity to put their name forward if, because what I've found over time is there's more and more people in this community who have hidden expertise that if we knew, we might draw on more. So, okay, so I'll just go back then to propose an amendment to the motion to ask, I guess it would be, let's just have a look here, and that council endorse in principle an amendment to the committee and board governance structure that would include at least an annual report to council.
From specific committees or all committees, or who?
Well, all committees should report at least annually to council or a committee of council.
We have a seconder. Councillor Doherty, any questions or comments? I'll start with the Deputy Mayor, and then I've got Councillor Berman.
Thank you. Just a question of clarification specific to this amendment. Is the thought that this would be over and above like a specific written report to the verbal report that we received last Monday from each of the committees?
Go ahead, Councillor Hamlin.
Yeah, so we are not receiving reports from certain boards and committees. And I'll just look at the list here. You know, EPCOR Town Advisory Committee, SC Alliance to End Homelessness. You know, the committee I sit on, Joint Physician Retention Action Group. These are some of the things I think about that we have council reps sitting on, but we never really know what the committees are talking about or what, you know, what input we might have or not have, or that's all. I just feel there should be some public knowledge of what our council members are sitting on, what committees are sitting on, and what's happening there.
Hello, Deputy Mayor.
I don't have any issue with that. I just was trying to get an understanding of the expectation. I would just offer a comment specific to SCADA, and that is that I volunteered for that. There's no terms of reference. The fact that I show up is just the fact that I show up. If it's the wish of council maybe to have more formal reports back, I'd be happy to do so.
Thank you. Councillor Berman.
Thank you. No, I was really going to ask pretty much what the Deputy Mayor asked, just sort of what Councillor Hamlin was looking for that was different than what we got last week. I have no problem with hearing from everyone minimum of once a year, but I can't figure it out quickly in my head which ones of these are not open to the public or don't send their minutes to council. But if there are any, absolutely they should give an update.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on this amendment, council? Seeing none, all in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. I'm going back to my initial list. I think after Councillor Hamlin, I had the Deputy Mayor. I'm not sure you were going to speak, I think, about the BIA and Heritage Committee.
Yes, I don't have a problem in moving this forward to council. And then maybe if I could follow up the question specific to BIA, we happen to have a meeting on Thursday morning, but I'd appreciate their input, and perhaps I could report back on their input. I believe that they should have a voice at the table with Heritage, given that they not only are invested from a physical, in the sense that the boundaries almost, not entirely, but almost overlap one another. But for many of these people, they have significant financial and capital interests within the defined areas. And therefore, I think that a representative from the BIA who's representing over 400 businesses, names, entities, etc., should have the right to have a vote on their behalf.
Okay. Do you want to sever that particular item off, and Deputy Mayor, so that you can vote in accordance with that? Because otherwise, we're going to be taking, with the exception of the Trails and Active Transportation, we're going to be taking them en masse.
Sure. I guess I'd request to have that severed out, and then. But what I was looking to do is simply just pose the question. I'm their representative. I'm not looking to vote one way or the other. I'm looking to ask them a question, report back to you. How would they proceed, not being having an opportunity to be a voting member of that particular committee?
Okay, we'll sever that one off.
Okay.
So we'll be calling the vote then on all but the Trails and Active Transportation and the BIA, Heritage Committee recommendations. So are there any questions or comments? We've had a good discussion. I'll call the vote to receive all others. In favor? That is carried. Then why don't we deal then with the next, the Heritage Committee with the BIA. I don't know, Deputy Mayor, if you want to ask for a deferral until you've had an opportunity to have the meeting at the BIA, so you can come back with their feelings and represent their position on this when we vote on this, or if you're content to go ahead and vote on it today.
Well, I'm not, I don't think it would be in my, I am in my capacity and through you to the clerk in a bit of a conflict, because I do have a vote. I'm a voting member of the BIA, and I don't think it would be advisable for me to make a decision on their behalf without having an opportunity to speak to them. So if that means voting against it today and then revisiting the issue at council, then so be it. I don't have an issue with that. I certainly, I don't want to, I'm not looking to defer. I'd like to continue. I'd like this entire thing to move forward. That's all.
Okay. That being the case, then I will call the vote on the Heritage Committee composition. I'm seeing two cards up. Go ahead, Councillor Hamlin.
Yes, I just have a question through you, Mr. Mayor, on this item, and it may be for staff. I've noticed that many heritage areas in towns and cities often are in business areas that would be having a BIA organization in place. Do we know if this is a common occurrence? In other words, to have a voting BIA member on a heritage committee?
Clerk Thomas.
Certainly, Your Worship. To answer Councillor Hamlin's question, now we would have to do some research. I'm not sure specifically.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. And just through you in a response to the Deputy Mayor's suggestion, and to be honest, I struggled with that myself, because I appreciate that as a member of the BIA that oftentimes there is a direct, to use the word of the Deputy Mayor, vested interest. But that said, that automatically becomes a pecuniary interest. So is it cleaner for the representative on the Heritage Committee to have a non-voting or voting? I'm honestly, I struggle with the answer to that question.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, you had your card up.
Thank you. The comments from Councillor Hamlin and Councillor Doherty are very valid. And I'm almost inclined at this point to request to defer this. I think that having Councillor Hamlin's question answered, it would be interesting to know, if we had a better understanding of what 10 other municipalities have in place as it relates to heritage and BIA, so that we're maybe consistent if there are best practices, et cetera. And I fully acknowledge Councillor Doherty's comment. When I sat on the Heritage Committee many years ago, around the table was Richard Lex, the late Mr. Christie, Doug Becker, all really good members of the committee, but both committee representatives for the town, as well as people with a direct pecuniary interest, invested interest, as business, not only business owners, but building owners within the district. So yeah, it is a tough one. I fully agree. So with that, if it was the will of you, the chair, I'd be inclined to ask either for a deferral or to have this move forward and just simply have it answered at council before we vote at council.
I'll look to the clerk, but maybe in the situation we're asking to refer this aspect back to staff to do some further research to get a determination of Councillor Hamlin's question and any other relevant information to come back. So would it be a referral versus a deferral, Sarah?
Sorry, Your Worship. So this is to start a public engagement process, what we're recommending doing. And the item will be added to the BIA board meeting this week. So, but if council doesn't want, if you're pulling this out separate from that and not letting it go through the public consultation piece, I guess that's a little bit what I'm challenged with right now. So when this comes back next Tuesday as part of the SIC report to council, as long as we have the information relating to, what similar BIAs do right now and the question about conflict addressed, that would help.
Well, so I think what you're saying is we don't want to pull this off the conveyor belt. We want it to go through to the public engagement. And so is there a way to do that without taking a formal position on the recommendation?
Correct.
Okay, so, well, was I guess a procedural question for you. Can we keep it on the conveyor belt but not have council take a position, I guess, on the recommendation, which is that the BIA member would be non-voting? Can we just ask that this matter go through to the public engagement with no determination of the issue of the BIA representative at this point?
Yes, sorry, Your Worship, thanks for the clarification. Yeah, so if the deputy mayor would, rather have it go that process, then because I believe the recommendation says it's supporting these recommendations in principle.
I think we're supporting the one-year pilot.
Right. So since we do have the Heritage Committee now pulled out, so that hasn't been, approved within this structure. So I recommend to say proceed, to public consultation without endorsing that recommendation in principle at this time until the public feedback is gauged.
Okay, Deputy Mayor, would you like to move that? Then in order to keep this as opposed to deferring it, we want to keep it on the conveyor belt. So we'll ask that this matter proceed to the public engagement, but the council not take a position on the BIA representatives status, I guess, voting status.
To provide some levity, as long as the conveyor belt is going along and I get my answers before Councillor McLeod gets her staff report back on the whatever other committee of adjustment, I'm cool with that. So I like what you and the clerk have put together. Thank you.
Very good. All right, and we'll need a seconder for that, please. Councillor Berman, and I will call the vote then. All in favor? So that will move forward, and Councillor Jeffrey, then I'll let you go and we'll deal with the Trails and Active Transportation recommendation. And so we've severed it off. It's got the same mover and seconder. Are there any questions or comments on the Trails and Active Transportation? Go ahead, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. I had a number of comments. The first of which was the recommendation in the terms of reference of meetings for this particular committee being quarterly. And I was surprised actually to see that in the terms of reference because this particular committee actually is directly or indirectly charged with implementation of our cycling plan, our active transportation plan, and indirectly traffic calming and the Maple Street project, and indirectly the waterfront master plan. So if any committee had a large mandate, it would be this one. And so I would I don't see how a committee could possibly get its work done within those parameters, meeting only quarterly. The second thing that struck me was the observation within the report that the committee drove a lot of work that was then downloaded back to staff. And again, based on the mandate that this committee has, it seems to me that that should only be natural, that they would be driving a lot of work. But they're also driving work across multiple departments, because it's not only PRC, but now increasingly it's Public Works. Finally, this committee has put historically and today more sweat equity into the sustenance or sustenance of our trails for 30 years now. And it seems to me, to be fair to members of the committee, that one of the criteria for membership on the committee should be the ability to provide some sweat equity or some additional volunteer time for the many, many tasks that the Trails and Active Transportation Committee are involved in. They've been rebuilding the boardwalk. They are regularly maintaining, improving, rebuilding trails. They have trail captains. They are keeping our map boxes filled. They do a yeoman's task on behalf of the residents of this municipality. And the residents in turn feed back that among their top 5 priorities and reasons for choosing to live in this town is the existence of trails. So all to say that I'm not in agreement with these recommendations that were made in regard to the Trails and Active Transportation terms of reference. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doherty. I think there was really 3 questions in there. I know under the membership it talks about will meet 4 times a year or as required. So I think there's some flexibility, and Clerk Almus, maybe you can take us through Councillor Doherty's 3 questions.
Certainly, Your Worship. So again, this here recommendation is what came from the committee itself. They appreciate that, they will be meeting, especially for the foreseeable future, much more than 4 times a year. I know that whenever I was conducting this review and we met with staff resources too of the various committees, that, this one is a very resource intensive committee. Understanding that they are, they put in a lot of sweat equity as well. So again, the 4 times is just a minimum requirement that we keep in there. I don't know if Director Culver or Director Salama have any further comments regarding why they came up with the 4 times a year themselves, but I believe that's similar to a number of our other committees and boards.
Director Culver?
Yeah, through you, Your Worship, I can just basically reiterate what Clerk Almus has said, that I think it was reflective of what the other committees are doing, and as a minimum, they were satisfied that it met what they needed. I also don't, I want to be cautious about, they definitely do put a lot of sweat equity in. They take on projects that are, that they determine for themselves and that are additive to our trails environment for sure. I want to correct one something that was, I think, misspoken, which is that they did not rebuild the Burn Boardwalk or any parts of the Harborview Boardwalk. We needed licensed contractors to do that and insured, but they do take on projects, like they are building a grade level or have been working on a grade level boardwalk in the Cranberry Marsh with leftover materials, which they do on a volunteer basis on weekends with members that actually are not formally part of the committee. So there's a lot of extra work that goes in, and they do that, and we're very, very grateful for it. But I just want to be clear on what the committee's mandate is and what they actually sort of do. We don't get them to do construction. I want to make sure we understand that.
Thank you, Dean. Does that assist, Councillor Doherty? Any follow-up?
Yes, does, and that does assist. And certainly I was not suggesting that it was mandatory that any member of the committee should participate in some of these activities. It's just that the fact of the matter is that they do. And perhaps as an assistance to town staff, perhaps there could be consideration made to add that function to the other parameters of membership on that particular board. That is to say, ability to do some volunteer work relative to building or maintaining of trails. Regarding the quarterly, I did not, in the report, I did not see that any of the other committees were meeting quarterly with an option to meet more often. Every other committee described its meeting frequency as monthly. So it almost implied to me in a way that meetings of these committees are of a lesser priority than some of the other committees, just by virtue of the fact that they didn't necessarily have to meet on a monthly basis. It's a question of perception, if nothing else. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doherty, and I think staff's noted the concerns. Any other questions or comments, Council, before I call the vote? Seeing none, all in favor then of the recommendation for the Trails and Active Transportation Committee? Opposed? Duly noted. Councillor Jeffrey is back, and this takes us to item 8, departmental updates. Are there any departmental updates today? Seeing none, then we did add other business. There was a change to the agenda last Monday. So other business, Councillor Berman.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I had asked if the CAO, or I guess maybe the clerk, could educate us on behavior at the table to do with party politics. I know there was some emails going around, but maybe they could educate the public as well.
Thank you. Who's picking this one up? CEO Skinner, Clerk Sarah, go ahead.
Certainly, I can assist with this discussion. There has been a few questions too from the public regarding responsibilities related to a member of an existing council that's running for candidacy for different levels of government. And so I can specifically advise that only a member of council becomes ineligible to remain as a member of council in accordance with the Municipal Act if they are elected to the legislature or the Senate, not during a local candidacy for a certain party. We do have parameters that are supported through our existing corporate resource use for election campaigning. As well as I know that I've shared with all members of council, the county has a policy too, but again, it's not specific to the situation that we're in right now. The 2022 election that's coming up next year sparks a review of our existing campaigning policy. And I think that we may advance that a little bit sooner and making that a little bit more of a broadened policy. It speaks to conduct of members of council that are campaigning or assisting in any sort of campaign. But right now, for council's purposes, council is mandated by their code of conduct, as well as their requirements in accordance with the procedural bylaw, not to be seen as using their influence for any other purpose than their official duties for council. So if there's any further clarification you would like, let me know.
Thank you. Councillor Berman, anything further?
Nope, I'm good with that. Thank you. Thank you, Clerk Almas.
I see how Skinner has her hand up. Go ahead, Sonia.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I did want to add, and I might have missed, the town does have an integrity commissioner. And should there be any items which are not entirely clear on the appropriate behavior to adhere strictly with the code of conduct requirements or the campaigning policy, there is an interpretation available to any member through the integrity commissioner as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Any other questions or comments, council? Go ahead, Councillor Jeffrey.
Under other business or to that item?
To this item.
Oh, not this item. Thank you.
Okay. And specifically on that, I can advise that I have been in contact with the Integrity Commissioner. There was some concern voiced last meeting about my ability to represent the town with the judicial inquiry recommendations at a provincial level. And I've been assured by the Integrity Commissioners that that's not an issue. If anyone is concerned, then certainly you can reach out to the Integrity Commissioner. So thank you for that. And Councillor Jeffrey, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. So my part of my asking for other business was to ask if other business could appear regularly on the Strategic Initiative Committee agenda. I've noticed in the past some difficulty in terms of being able to bring things to discussion that would be for SIC, and because there's only the specific agenda items that we've experienced to date. So I guess through to the clerk, if that's a possibility or what that would require to have other business appear on the SIC agenda.
I saw the clerk nodding her head, so go ahead, Sarah.
Certainly, Your Worship, to Councillor Jeffrey. That's something definitely we can do administratively, but regardless, I just want to encourage members of standing committees too. If you have items that you want on an agenda, feel free to reach out to us before the agenda is even issued, and we can add that on for the committee's preparation too of different items you may wish to speak about.
Okay. Thank you. Through the mayor. Oh, there it is. Then my second question, that actually why I asked for other business to be added, was to ask, I don't know if it's a staff report or just an educational moment, but just to have an understanding of the mayoral resources in terms of fulfilling that responsibility as mayor and the accessibility to them, because I know we've gone through so many reiterations over a number of years. Sometimes the mayor had an executive assistant, the CAO had one, and then we went through an iteration where they shared one, and then we went kind of, I think, into this model where they don't have one at all. And I think that it's really important for a mayor to be able to do his job, to have those resources without council having to ask for them. And so maybe that's just my misunderstanding. So I don't know whether that takes its form in an update at a future SIC meeting, or it can be answered tonight. But I would hate to think that our mayor would be restricted and be able to do his job with a lack of resources that council hasn't given him, either through a budget process or another understanding. His role is dictated by so many other parameters in terms of with the Integrity Commissioner, as we just heard, in our code of conduct and in our policies, and his job is described in the Municipal Act. So I just want to make sure he has every benefit of the resources he needs to do his job. And I guess that might be through the CAO, if we could just, I know at some point, it doesn't have to be today. It's just a confirmation of how that's rolling out and how it works, because it has gone through many forms.
All right, yeah, go ahead, Clerk Almus.
Certainly, I can briefly speak to regular clerical support. So right now, we do have a position that's an administrative position to clerk services, but provides the function of administrative assistance to mayor and all of council. So we have that capacity. It's similar to what it's been provided before. The priorities for that position tend to be more council focused. If there is any additional capacities that we can utilize her services within our role within clerk services. But as for larger technical resources, I'll defer that to the CAO.
Sonia?
Nope, you're on mute.
You're muted, Sonia.
Thank you, Your Worship. In response to Councillor Jeffrey as well, I think I just would need to learn a little more about the requirements that are not being met. Typically, the way that I have thought of it up till quite recently, and we just had started to have a conversation about the resourcing is that we had the administrative position available, and then based on any priority identified or any budget item identified by council, we would then resource that item to move forward. So I think for me, one of the best things that could happen next would be to have an offline conversation with Councillor Jeffrey and then potentially the mayor or anybody else that wanted to individually wade in, and just to see a little more deeply what some of the issues are or are perceived to be, so that we could figure out if we need to bring this back to the council table as a resourcing discussion, or maybe it's just something where we're not communicating as clearly as we should to provide supports to the mayor and the members.
Thank you, Sonia. Any follow-up, Councillor Jeffrey?
Oh, no, thank you. I will follow up with the CAO. So that's great. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Any other business, council? Seeing none, I think we're at, oh, no, deputations. Sarah, do we have anyone from the public who would like to speak for 5 minutes on an issue?
Certainly, Your Worship. We have 2 individuals that are still attendees. If you wish to speak to council, please press the raise your hand feature or *9. I do see Matthew Pretty is still here. We will unmute him. I'm not sure if his hand is still up from the previous time.
Hello, Matthew, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. I've turned to the live channel showing the downtown. Standing up here, it's a long time to be at the machine. I know everyone's probably, going through personal challenges with being at home. I know today I had a funny feeling and I wanted to walk to town to get the agenda as an activity, to get a paper print off. I think a lot of the students might be missing out on with school. I was just looking to CP24, which has good information regarding provincial news. I would like to offer a question and just a quick comment recommendation about town council, the town as a population, of all persons who live here, in this very time that we all get, vitamin D from the sun. We have plans, to get through layoffs and getting back to work, accessing financial aid, keeping, a connection with family, also remembering to be careful of not to lose a room, not to lose a home or family members, because my question alludes to this. Everyone's doing such a great job. Again, Councillor Hamlin, you really impressed me with your questions. Councillor McLeod, Councillor Jeffrey, Councillor Doherty, Deputy Mayor Hall, Councillor Berman, Councillor Madigan, Mayor Saunderson, Clerk Almus. I hope I'm not forgetting anyone. Guys, will Blue Mountain open? Town Council, a question from me right now from a current event standpoint. Will Blue Mountain open this week, next week, this month? Does anyone have any information regarding the the address today by the Premier. What's going on? What are we expecting? Are we going to have a return of tourists back to the town? And do we have sustainable plans for employment in relation to issues like this? You know, we should definitely get people more involved in construction, labor, skilled trades, expand Georgian College. Somebody's got to get on that. We should do an expansion of skilled trade opportunities for local people and people in the region. We got to think regional. This whole local thing's dying, you know, it's regional or nothing. Guys, what are we going to see here? Are we going to see thousands of people come back up in the next week, or do we have a little more time? Thank you, everyone. Take care, go slow, and keep your health in check with turning off your machines when unnecessary. Thank you, everyone. I'll hand it back to the Mayor for that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. And today at 1 p.m., the Premier did announce that there will be the shutdown order for our area will end next Tuesday, February 16. It's not a reopening. Stores will be able to open, but there will continue to be restrictions in place, and we have yet to learn all the details. So I do not know whether that will include the ski hills, but there is going to be an end to the shutdown order and a gradual reintroduction is for businesses and for getting out of the house. But there is still a recommendation that people stay home unless absolutely necessary. While the numbers are down, there are still concerns about the other variants that are much more aggressive. So we will learn more, and as we learn more, we will put that on the website for our public. So thank you for that question, Matt. And with that being said, we're looking for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Jeffrey, all in favor? Thank you very much, Council. That was a busy two-part meeting. And for the Operations and Development Committee, we've got 50 minutes to get ready. So I'll see you soon. Thanks.